Hello and welcome to the studio. I'm Lee Sellers and we're going to be discussing how to win customer attention in the hybrid world. First of all, Sarah, can I ask you, how have your customer habits and behaviours changed in the last couple of years?
Well, I think they've changed in the same way that society's habits have changed in the last few years. We can no longer rely on somebody working 9 to 5. We can no longer rely on them being in the location that they might purport to be. We can no longer rely that they've got an attention span that will allow it to last an hour or 30 minutes. So we have to be able to have content that I think's ready to be consumed when customers are ready to consume them through the channels that they're working for. And it needs to be more valuable and eye-catching than I would suggest than ever before.
Okay, thank you. And John, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, everything's changed and nothing's changed because as marketers, we've always tried to, I guess, bring our content, our story to customers at the right place, the right time, and try to use data and insight to do that. I think the last couple of years, as Sarah said, that's kind of exploded with another set of variables, which is people aren't necessarily located where we might think they are. So, people are remote working in all parts of the world. And, we used to bank on, having them in a certain location. So I think to some extent, yes, everything has changed about their work habits. But for us as marketers, nothing's changed. We still have to think about doing great marketing.
It's just they're in different locations.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, which means then, we've always thought about the best channels, the best ways to reach them, broadly between physical and virtual. And, we've been on that journey. Of course, it's just been accelerated the last few years. And again, just think more about the customer experience and based on what we just said, how we just continue to think about the best channel to have that communications. Sarah said that could be live in person, it could be live online, or it could be something that's on demand. And we've just got to factor that in now even more than we ever have.
So, Simon, it's a continuous change.
It's continuous change, but I agree with what you're saying. A lot of stuff stayed the same. In the B2B market space, we are in the complex buyer groups that we're operating with. And I think some of the changing behaviours that we're seeing is that these buyer groups need to actually convince other people on the board. And I think there's more demand to say, help me to bring that into my organisation, to sell to my board, to show the value, to actually go and show that we're relevant in terms of what we're delivering and how we actually create a return on investment from it. So I think it's changed in some way that there are new demands on us in terms of helping members of the board to convey and bring that value across in an environment where we're not sitting around the table, we're not having coffee with everybody. And you have to remember, many of these board members have joined during this time, so they don't have the same level of intimacy with the other board members. So I think we're seeing a change in what people are demanding to go and drive value into their business.
Oh, that's interesting. So, Isabel, have you noticed that there are more demands on you?
Yes, I have. I want to go back to the change first, if I may, though. What I personally noticed is during COVID, there was this explosion of consumption of content. Yes, we had been going digital for some time, but suddenly everything was digital, including things that were face-to-face like events. And suddenly, that interaction was all digital. I think for me, the biggest challenge was how best to respond to those interactions, because it was harder to figure out, is this just a passive interaction or is this a very proactive interaction? As marketers, especially in B2B tech, we know if it's somebody coming in, to an event, it's actually quite a proactive interaction. We know how to respond to this. There's a real interest. We kind of know what the next steps need to be. And what was hard was trying to distinguish, is it passive, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a lot more. We thought initially, wow, it's a bonanza of interaction we're getting. So, and then there was like, well, what do I do with it? How do I best respond? So I think that for me has been the biggest change.
Well, that's yes, everything accelerated, didn't it,
absolutely.
during COVID? That's the next question, really. How are you therefore evolving your marketing strategies to meet those new demands?
It literally is, and you're right, I have kind of already started talking about this. It's understanding the passive and the proactive, right? The piece that is incredibly hard. I think, as marketeers, especially in B2B tech, we kind of get a little obsessed about the buyer's journey. Am I the only one, or have you encountered that as well?
Buyer journey is critical.
The buyers, we are obsessed about this, and it is kind of it is part of our world. I have a bugbear about the journey because I don't think the journey is a constant, and I don't think it is linear either. So when you think about what I was talking about, is it a proactive, is it a passive interaction? This is what we're trying to figure out, right? What do we do next, right?
So that's your big challenge.
That is absolutely the big challenge, yes.
Yeah. John, what do you think? Is that the big challenge?
I agree. I mean, we do like to obsess about things like buyer's journeys and think of it as a linear thing. I kind of smile because a lot of our journey as marketing leaders, probably up to the pandemic, was probably trying to get our teams to get more digital, right?
Yeah.
And we laugh now because it's kind of, okay, that's done, right? And as Isabel said, during the pandemic, we had phenomenal perceived engagement in all of our digital activities, and you get very excited about it. But I think we also have to remember that no one really, we think about it very passionately in the terms of a buyer's journey, that these individuals or buying groups are interacting with us with the intention of coming along with us, getting to know us and buying something. I think the reality is, we all have to accept as marketers, is no one cares about all of this. Our customers and prospects don't care. They don't think like that. They don't think, right, I'm now on a voyage of discovery with, in my case, VMware or where the company have been at. No one cares about that. So we have to continue to make sure that we are using those right signals in the right way. We can the beauty of, I think, B2B marketing now is we can collect and analyze and synthesize any amount of data. But really, it's trying to get to that human element of, is this a real intention from someone wanting to, it's like a cry for help that they want to buy our solution. So that is the big challenge, just taking all this digital content. People are much more willing in a predominantly more digital world to interact with data than maybe 5 years ago, or definitely 10 years ago, when it was seen as a strong intent signal. And that is our challenge, is how do we go through all this digital noise and all this engagement noise to drive that forward. And I think the challenge for us then is factoring in that understanding of people being at home, probably more, more ready to access data. They're not traveling so much. They're not necessarily in office environments, so they're consuming a little bit more than they used to. It peaked in the pandemic and it's gone back down again. And then also factoring in the challenge for us is thinking about the right place to bring this content to them, be that an event like this for this audience, or be that in a hybrid, physical, virtual, or totally virtual. What's the thing on the sort of general office politics, which is, why do we need this meeting? It could have just been an email. Why do we need this in-person event where we came all the way in when this could have been a webinar, or it could have been some digital content? So anyway, the challenge for us as operationally is thinking at every single touch point and making sure we've got the right blend of, physical channel, digital channel, that really recognizes the human interaction that people want to engage with as our brand.
So, Sarah, the human interaction, fine-tuning everything to get to people on a human level.
Very much so, and I think really building on something, Simon, that you mentioned as well, you touched on earlier, it's not just about the buyer centre, it's also the fact they have to educate people who don't understand the benefits of whatever it is that we're trying to market. And we have to start talking in business benefit terms, and we have to be a lot more overt than I think we've ever had to be in the past. It's not good enough just simply to talk about the benefits, in my case, software. It has to be also talking about the benefits to the organisation of being able to implement and the value that the organisation should be able to receive. And that, for me, is an evolution in the last 2 years, because before that, people perhaps understood, or the buying groups weren't so large. You didn't have to go into that broader education at a board or a business level. And that's hard, I think, for a lot of marketeers who've grown up in different times, and getting that evolution to talk about the commercial be it top or bottom line return, isn't something that marketeers necessarily have had to learn before. But it's very exciting because it makes us more commercial beings.
That's good. Simon, what are your new marketing strategies to deal with
So
this?
I cut it to one word,
What?
which is relevance.
Yes.
And I think relevance and what I hear about the noise and the challenges and the buyer groups and what we have to do and everything that's changed in terms of the digital side of things over the last couple of years. Relevance is the thing that trumps it because the world's become very noisy, but also the barriers to entry have become very low. So all of a sudden you have somebody coming in from another country, from a different market, from a different industry, and literally eating your lunch. And they may show up and look like a big, sophisticated organization, but could be a one-person band sitting there doing it in a country that's not local. So relevance to me is the real challenge. How do we show up at the right time with something that's of interest, positioned directly for the person, for the individual, but positioned for something for their industry and for their company? And how do we get to know and understand that individual and have a level of intimacy that understands the type of things they need? And by the way, when they need them. Because if you turn up at the wrong time, we also know it doesn't work. So relevancy to me is the single word that I put forward that's changed our work.
You're talking about specifics, being specific and tailoring the marketing much more so.
Not beyond tailoring to personal.
Yeah,
I would
personal,
say at that
even
level,
more.
what is that person looking at and what are their challenges? How can you start making sense of what's going on? If somebody in an organization has certain challenges, maybe they've got organizational challenges, growth objectives, maybe they're trying to literally save the farm. What do they need? But then look at the individual. Maybe they're off work for something. Maybe they've got a challenge with their team. So how do you help them in terms of speed that they're working on? So linking all of the information through sense making to understand what's personal for that person, not just personalized.
It's a lot more work, isn't it?
It can be a lot more work, but this is where the technology comes in.
Yeah,
So
well,
you start
you've got your tech.
looking
Yeah.
at different tech, and you look at artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
You look at all the data. You look at doing it at speed, and you look at helping humans to be more efficient and effective. You have to put data in, otherwise you can't do this. You can't do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week across all audiences.
And I think, Simon, you made a good differentiation. It's personalized and personal, right? Because we don't need to know their inside leg measurement and all that
Unless
stuff.
you're selling trousers,
Unless
of
you're
course,
selling trousers.
which is very important at that point.
Yes. But in B2B tech, we don't need all those personal details, but we can pick up a lot in terms of understanding them, using data to be in the right place at the right time, and then understand the behaviors of what they're interested in and what they're not, and making it more personal. And I think as well, it's humanizing the story, right? I mean, fundamentally, most B2B buyers want to do one of four things. They want to be a hero in their company. They want to probably save their job, help the company make money, or help the company save money. And that's about it. There are no other stories to be told. So how can we help them in an authentic and human way? Then once we have the data, the great thing is we can use the data and analytics to get to the right place, understand the right story, but then there's still a need in terms of all the creative things to tell that story in a way that's engaging, that cuts through the noise that you were talking about.
I see another big change, and I'm interested to hear from others if they see the same, which is I think before the pandemic we were happy to go and kind of work on our own, work it alone, go in there. And now it's much more about the ecosystem. The ecosystem has become much, much more important. I see things like sustainability as driving it, the broad breadth of data that we have to access driving it, the local, for instance, access and geographic location of clients. I don't know whether everybody's seeing the same, but this challenge around and the opportunity around ecosystems, also a fundamental change.
Yeah, I think the data for me is the key part. It's really interesting because you both touched on, making it relevant and personal. And as you were both saying this, there was the French side of me, and I should declare I am French, right?
C'est bon.
There was the French side of me saying, please, 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 without being spooky. And because I think that's a fine line we tread, and often we don't do it very well. I certainly get very emotional about people knowing too much about me, having too much information, and then it's a complete turn-off. You lose me almost immediately. And that's whether it is from a consumer purchase I'm making or a B2B purchase. There is that line. Now, I will say probably some of us born in a continent and brought up in a continent feel that more strongly.
No, I feel it too as a consumer. I do. I think, how did they know I wanted to look at that?
Yeah.
And it's spooky.
I think
it
it's
gets
a
creepy, it gets
generational
creepy.
thing to this, though.
Oh, is it? Right then.
Well,
You youngsters.
Well, they say it's good to target you because I don't want all the irrelevant stuff. I want stuff that matters to me.
And there are a generation that have grown up with tags. And there's a generation, if you look at Generation X, it was defined by don't define me.
Yes.
To current generation, which is define me.
Yes.
And market according to that. And it's difficult when you get to a certain age when you can't relate to it, because particularly when you've got that element of I will never be defined, to someone saying, no, define and personalise to that point.
Yeah.
And that
gets change as well, don't you?
Absolutely.
I mean, you don't stay the same. My needs are different to what they were when I was 20, and they're now different, and I've got, and my career has evolved, my needs have changed, and suddenly I want to work slightly differently. So we can't be put into little boxes.
But if something's relevant and adds value.
I think Zed wants to be in boxes. I think there's a piece around that coming through which we have to be aware of different elements, and it is fascinating coming through. So it's still back down to listen to your clients, listen to the cues they're giving you, and respond accordingly. Yeah. The data will tell us whether they're being turned off or wrong.
I think it's value though. If it delivers you value and it's relevant, you don't mind. If it's creepy, then you do mind. If somebody helps you find a parking space, you're delighted. Yeah. If somebody uses the same data to give you a parking ticket, you're not so pleased. So I think it depends how the data's being used. Give me value, I'm happy to accept it.
Yeah, and I think, coming back to one of your original questions, that's another thing that's accelerated, is that the power is with the consumer now and the customer. So I think the power in, going back as long as I started in this profession, the power of very much of brands. For example, a tactical example, for a customer, for a prospect to find out about you, they had to come to like a trade show, right? That was the thing, because that was the only way they could find out about you. Now they know everything about you before you've even spoken to them. So the power has moved to the customer, to the consumer. And I think, that's also mirrored in, some of the generational things where, I think to Sarah's point, I think people want to say, I'm in control. And that's not saying I don't want all my data out there. It's like, I want to be served and treated in that relevant way. I'm bring it on. As long as you're targeting me with specific offers, I'm in there. I'm not putting up a firewall. I'm the king of
But I can switch you off as well.
Yes.
I think that power.
Yes. And to Simon's point, that's exactly another thing that happens, yeah.
I want to move on to the next point. Isabel, what are the known unknowns in this context regarding customer attention? What are the risks, really?
Yeah, I think we've actually touched on I think, what are the two most important ones for me? The first one is data, right? Data regulation is part of what we have to deal with as marketers, right? There is a ton of changes coming up, right? And I think we're not entirely sure what those changes are, how they're going to affect us. I think maybe as marketers, and I take myself as an example, we don't look at this proactively enough. We kind of wait for the legislation to appear, and then suddenly we all start in panic thinking, wow, are we going to do our jobs? So I think that's a big unknown, right? What's going to come next? How are we going to have to deal with this data? And then if you add on to this what you brought in, which is what's happening with AI and the new tools that are going to be available to us, that's wow. So I think it is incumbent on all of us, though, to be incredibly proactive about understanding how is data likely to be used going forward. And then, as marketers, we've got to go and speak to our legal counterparts. We've got to go and speak to our chief digital officers, chief data officers, if we've got them, if we're lucky enough to have them within our organizations. I think that's the first one I put out there as a known unknown. The second one, Sarah touched on it beautifully, and I don't actually have much to say, but it is just literally new generations. Yes. I'm part of the old generation, right? I behave a certain way. Our buyers are getting younger. They want different things. Now, they themselves will evolve, right? How they are today and the generation that they've come from, yes, it is different to ours, but it will also evolve, right? Trying to figure out how best to respond to their needs, right? That's a tough one. I am still learning about this every day.
Well, it's really good that you brought that up, that generation thing. But what do you think the known unknowns are, or the blind spots we might have?
Well, I'll add, because I agree with everything that you said, Isabel, and I sort of double down perhaps on the AI side of it. If we think, in terms of performance marketing, it's either paid, organic, or communities. I think we probably all agree that it falls into those buckets. And all of them are about to be turned upside down because of AI. The way that paid works will not be the same again. Organic searches are completely different. I was watching some things with Bing last week, and it's amazing how that's changing, and they're going to be delivering organic within that. And then the power of communities, I don't think we even understand how that's going to be touched by AI. So for me, that's the big one. I'm fascinated by it. I'm a student of it. With regulation, I'm slightly terrified of what's to come with it. So I think it fits in all of the buckets that you just said, but should be dominating our conversation for quite a while to come.
Yeah,
what about you, John?
I mean, I would concur with those technology observations and those uncertainties and unknowns around where regulation and privacy and data goes. The other thing, coming back to the topic for the discussion, which is sort of the hybrid world. I personally, I think we're in a transition phase right now in terms of how people are working. I think we rebounded back from the pandemic, which in itself was a transitional phase. I don't think this is it. I don't think this is how we're going to be working in the next 5 to 10 years, but I don't know what that is. So for us as marketers, it keeps us young, I guess. That's what I like about it. It keeps us on our toes because we're likely to have to change our strategies again next few years because the way in which companies work is going to change. Because I know my company, we're still really in a state of flux. We don't know what to do. We're trying to sort of work out what the right dynamic is in terms of the way we've always supported remote and hybrid working, but kind of as a, let's say, a policy. Maybe there isn't a policy anymore. So I think that's the other thing I would add is just not knowing where that's going to go in the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, these are the known unknowns.
Yeah.
What about you, Simon?
So I guess it links to the three discussions here, but I would say transparency. With a lot moving to AI, we've heard a lot of AI mentioned, with a lot of reliance on data, doing stuff at speed and new generations coming in. I think transparency is something that we need to think about. Not just governance, not just what's mandated on us, but how do we make some of this stuff transparent? How we're using data, the decisions that we're making in AI. How do we make sure that we haven't got bias in the AI? If you're teaching a system for one set and you don't bring in a mix, then you're not going to have inclusivity. You're going to have a biased AI system making decisions that maybe aren't acceptable to us in society. So to me, transparency sits there alongside governance. And we need to make sure that we can deliver things like generative AI in a way that's transparent so people know it's not real, but you're enjoying it, or it is real. But if you start making out that it's not real, but that non-reality is in fact reality, then you start getting to the point that you haven't got transparency and you're almost tricking people, if you like. So transparency with the governance is really important.
How do you do that? I mean, can you watermark these, ChatGPT things? How do you do it?
So there's a ton of work going on right now to do it. We just had some major announcements last week exactly in this space, but it is about making sure that you have the systems there that can enable people to deliver the value of AI fast with data sets that they own as opposed to being owned out there in the general environment so that you maintain and keep that proprietary value, and then having the right controls and governance built in. So you need a platform, you need a tool set to build it on that manages it through, but you also need the governance and controls in place. So there's lots and lots of work to do in this space, and I think we're very early on, but the opportunities are massive for businesses to think about how they can change their business through generative AI, making sure that they've got transparency in there, and of course the right governance that they need to have in place. So it's a start of the journey.
So the last question that we've already touched on with John is hybrid working here to stay?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Hybrid work, it's interesting because we look at the pandemic and I think we worked in that way already. We worked from where we needed to work from. I think that the pandemic and the challenges of the last couple of years have accelerated that, and now it's become more acceptable elsewhere. However, hybrid says that you're not always at home. Hybrid says you're not always in the office. So it is about getting the right mix. And I think it's really, really important to come back in. And when you think about the next generation, how do they understand the culture? How do they build the skills? How do they learn? How do you onboard them if nobody's sitting there in the office? So it's a real challenge, but I think hybrid's here to stay, but we need to manage it sensibly.
And I think quite interesting because we've all maybe got an assumption about what we mean by hybrid. Is it remote versus office bound? Is it asynchronous versus synchronous? Is it standard hours versus a combination of hours? And I'm I'm sure you can all about 17 more to all of those things. I think to think hybrid is just office versus non-office would be naive at best now. Everything's up for grabs. The way that we want to work, again, generationally is quite interesting, because when I talk to sort of a lot of Generation Z, and they're like, well, I work 9 to 5 and anything more than that is my choice to give the company. Which,
Wow.
and like, wow, you're blowing my mind. I grew up in a recession where if you had a job, you just stayed there till they kicked you out. Because
till midnight.
Yeah, if you had to, because you were scared to. I think recession's going to come into that a little bit more, and that will drive people's need. If they're desperate for a job, sadly, they might work in a different way or conform to different norms. So to John, to your point, I don't think we're done with hybrid. I just don't think we've defined what it means yet, because there's many more levels than just office first or...
No, I think
home
you're
first.
right. And there's a problem. I was listening to another panel about engagement, getting people to meetings, real life meetings, and favouring the people who actually get to the office rather than the people who stay at home. Is that unconscious bias? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, we all work in tech companies, so we probably all say we've had pretty flexible working environments for decades. And what I didn't like about the pandemic was the constant, the monotony of the same way of working, where I've been used to being in the office, traveling, meeting, or the variety is really what's quite, interesting working tech companies. It's those models. What do we mean by hybrid? But also, I think the shift has been the power to the employees right now to make their own decisions. So, companies now have to go with the employees and let them make the decision about what they want to do, versus saying anything, which could be even saying, we want you in 1 day a week and then 4 days at home. People say, no, I'm not doing that. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not coming in 1 day a week. And that's the environment we're in now. So I think companies need to work out their role in some of the things we talked about. Some elements of work are important for the individuals, and they may not appreciate what those things are, like feeling part of, a team, a community, however you want to call it. The value of networking with those individuals, the value comes out of doing your job. And a lot of people have never seen that, never understood the career benefit of people coming together. Because if we're all just distilled down to a transactions on a Zoom call,
it would be dull.
That would be dull. And, there's some things says if your job can be learnt by a graduate in 90 days, then, you need to think about adding more high value work to the role. And answering emails can be done by an AI chatbot at home if that's what you're doing a lot of. So it's just the way it's going.
I think people can also make their computers look like they're on when they're not.
But no, again, it's just reminding us that there are a lot of elements to work, which is not just about getting something done.
Yeah.
It's about everything else that comes with it. Yeah.
The unknowns.
I will say,
Isabel.
You asked a very direct question, is it here to stay? I'm absolutely emphatically yes.
Yes.
And if there's one reason why I'm so confident about the yes, is because that's the first question I get asked at interview before salary.
Oh, wow.
This is now by the new generation. Now, as part of my role at Octo, which I've recently moved away from, I have done hundreds of interviews during the pandemic and since it's finished. Absolutely, vast majority of those interviews were with the new generation. Absolutely before salary question comes the question, will you allow me to work from home? So that gives me confidence in saying that, yes, it's here to stay. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say is I am personally hugely excited about it. And if I may bring just a little bit of personal element, during the pandemic, I was one of actually those really awkward people who had to shield. So I shielded for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And it's opened my eyes. So, and by shielding, I should say, I did not leave my house for 2 years.
Wow.
And I don't want you to feel sorry for me either way, because actually it was a huge...
Let me get you a biscuit.
Well, it's more, what did it teach you?
Yeah.
What did you
and
learn?
that is it. So what it taught me is, first of all, probably it suited me because I am more on the introvert side than the extrovert side. And I have worked being in tech remotely for decades. But it suddenly made me realize that there was an opportunity for hugely talented people to be awesome at their job without having to go into the office. Think about people who physically cannot move because they've got a body impairment, because of whatever. And suddenly those people have got amazing opportunities. And then there's something that really touched my heart earlier in one of the sessions we listened to. And I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name of the speaker. But she said, most of the new people they hire, the young people, they are remote first because they cannot afford. Based in South Africa, young people do not have enough money to come into it. And do you know what? This is what I've learned. So I'm excited because it gives lots of opportunities to people who wouldn't necessarily have those opportunities.
Those are such good points, that you can get completely new talent that was not available before.
Utterly. And then the final thing, which is beautiful in all of this, is it actually helps with the environment, right? There's less commute, there's less traffic, there's less need for large offices that are empty. So, gosh, I'm super excited. I think it's sad that it came as part of COVID because that was pretty hideous. But actually, I see this as a real positive thing.
It's about tapping into that whilst balancing the need for culture and belonging, because people want to belong, and we are social animals by nature as humans. And therefore, how do you tap into all those advantages, which I think are great advantages, and at the same time keep a company culture, bring on the next generation, tap into keeping people feeling they've got purpose and they're alive and engaged and passionate, and moving away from the I only work 9 till 5 and I tick in the box and do those bits. So there's a balance.
Not necessarily. We're assuming that's a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. No. It's just a thing. It's until you can take advantage and bring the best out of that element. Being able to provide opportunities to people who didn't have them before, that's fantastic. There'll also be another section of society for whom that is their worst nightmare, that all they've got is that virtual thing. We need options as human beings. And I think that's what really this has taught us in the last 2 years. Oddly, by having no options for a while, we've ended up with more options.
And there's a flip side to both, as you two have pointed out.
Yeah.
It can be a tremendous advantage being remote, but also there's the cultural element, the team building, togetherness that you get when you're sparking ideas off each other in real life.
I think it's the word I've used it, flexibility.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, if you're working in a hybrid environment, whether it's hours, location, it doesn't really matter. It's about being flexible around it. So there are times when you can come together both physically and digitally. I think flexibility is core to getting the most out of it.
I think that's it. It comes back to your question of what hybrid means. And Isabel's beautifully described the benefit. Absolutely, more inclusive. It is about giving people more options, and it gives us ultimately access to a wider pool of talent as well, which before we used to say, no, you've got to come into the office, you've got to commute into central London, you've got to spend going 2 hours each way and all of that's gone. So, I do agree, but I don't think we've worked out what that is quite yet. And technology hasn't got there yet, despite our, the proliferation of the video conferencing tools. They're not the best tools to build that.
It's not
that
there
connection.
yet.
No,
you're right.
Really.
The human element is really difficult.
Yes.
But it was really interesting because one of the other things that I learned is how my life could have taken a different turn had I had that hybrid work available to me much earlier. So again, I'm going to bore you with a personal story.
Go on.
I hope you don't mind. I was born and brought up in the most remote part of France, not even big enough to be called a village. There was only 3 houses, right? I came over to Britain simply because I knew that I wasn't going to get a very exciting job there. And yet I can tell you my heart is there in as much as I prefer to be in the countryside. This is my happy place, right? Cities scare me a little bit, right? They're out of my comfort zone. My life could have taken a completely different turn. If I had been born, much later, I might not have had to leave home, right, and make some pretty difficult choices.
But would you have got the job not being an urban person? Who knows?
I don't know. It is another unknown as we were talking. But,
the unknowns.
But I'm excited. I'm excited for it, though. I really am. I think the more inclusive that makes us all, then I think the better. It just equalizes a little bit the opportunities available to everyone.
And I guess, what we're saying here is we were talking about our own experiences or our teams. All of this we have to translate to customers.
Yeah.
Because they're going through every single one of these things on a ones to thousands and millions of scales. And that's why I'm more excited about marketing than I've ever been, because the challenge is so different now, and it's going to continue to be different, because for every element that we're talking about here, that's a different sector of the customer, that's a different persona that we've got to take into account when we're choosing channels, writing content, or coming up with the ideal customer profile.
Well, you've brought us back to the customer, and Simon, you talked about relevance. I think you once used an expression, spray and pray with marketing, is that right?
Spray and pray certainly being used in the
And it's
past.
not like that anymore. It's
No.
personalised, it's targeted.
It's deliberate.
And also we've said there's a lot of employee power. Anything else you've learnt from this discussion? Or conclude from this discussion?
So I think
I'm sure
I conclude from this discussion that we kind of all travelled through this journey in the same storm, but we've been on different boats. And as we've gone through the storm, I think there are different learnings. So the personal experiences that you've had in terms of where it's been and it's unlocked, the opportunities, I think, with the new generation, and I think some of the noise out there. I recognise these challenges, and I think the technology begins to provide some more of the answers towards them. But we need to think about how we put those in place so that we're, again, I go back to the word relevant, so that we're relevant to our people, as well as being relevant to our clients as we think about the marketing we're doing. So, but we do need to think about culture. We do need to think about bringing new people on board. So we've got to balance some of these things to remain relevant and to cut through some of the noise that's out there right now.
Good.
What he said.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I think that wraps it up nicely. And we've talked about customers, customer journeys, and hybrid working, which has brought a whole new light to hybrid working for me. So thank you all very much. That's all from the studio for now.